The wagon stopped. The woman stepped down, hope shining in her eyes. Then Frank Dillard handed her a crumpled letter and rode away, leaving her there like unwanted cargo. Wyatt Collins watched from his fence as her dreams shattered in the dust. He didn't know her name yet, but he knew that look. The look of someone left behind by a world too cruel to care. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Stay with me till the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The sun hung merciless over Red Mesa, Texas, that Tuesday in late summer, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and dance above the prairie grass like liquid silver. Wyatt Collins stood at his fence line, hammer in hand, sweat soaking through his shirt as he worked on the gate that had been hanging crooked for 3 days now. He was a man of routine. Wake before dawn, tend the horses, mend what needed mending, and ask nothing from nobody. At 32, he'd learned that solitude was safer than hope, and silence was better than the kind of promises people made and broke like dry kindling. But routine shattered the moment he heard the wagon wheels creaking down the road. Wyatt looked up, squinting against the glare. A buckboard wagon rolled toward Frank Dillard's property, the neighbor who lived a quarter-mile east. Frank was a hard man, the kind who measured worth in cattle and land, who spoke in grunts and demands. Wyatt had never liked him much, but they maintained the kind of distant civility that frontier neighbors required. Help during roundup, a nod when passing, nothing more. The wagon stopped at Frank's gate. Wyatt couldn't see the driver clearly from this distance, but he could make out Frank's stocky frame as the man walked out from his porch. Then someone else emerged from the wagon, a woman, her dress a pale blue that stood out against the dusty browns and golds of the landscape. Wyatt told himself to mind his own business. He turned back to the gate, drove another nail. But something made him look up again. The woman was standing now, and even from 100 yards away, Wyatt could see her posture, straight-backed, hopeful, one hand smoothing down her dress like she wanted to make a good impression. She had a small trunk beside her, and she was smiling, actually smiling, bright and nervous, the way people smiled when they were about to step into a dream they'd been chasing for months. Frank stood 10 feet away from her, arms crossed, face hard as granite. The wagon driver said something Wyatt couldn't hear, then snapped the reins. The wagon pulled away, leaving the woman standing there with her trunk and her smile and her hope. She took a step toward Frank, hand extended. Frank didn't take it. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a piece of paper, folded and wrinkled, and thrust it toward her. The woman's smile faltered. She took the letter, confusion crossing her face. Her lips moved, forming words Wyatt couldn't hear. Questions, probably. Maybe please. Frank turned his back on her. Just like that. Turned and walked toward his house like she was nothing more than an inconvenient interruption to his day. The woman stood frozen, the letter trembling in her hands. She looked down at it, and even from this distance, Wyatt saw the moment she started reading, saw the way her shoulders drew up tight, the way her free hand came up to her mouth, saw the exact second her whole world collapsed. Her knees buckled. She didn't quite fall, but she sank down, right there in the dirt, that pale blue dress pooling around her like spilled water. The letter fell from her fingers, caught by the breeze, skittering a few feet away before snagging on a clump of sage. Frank Dillard went inside his house and shut the door. Wyatt's hammer slipped from his hand, clattering against the fence post. He'd seen a lot of hard things in his 32 years. He'd seen cattle die in winter freezes, seen good men broken by drought and debt, seen dreams dry up and blow away like topsoil in a dust storm. But there was something about this, about the casual cruelty of it, the way Frank had discarded this woman like she was defective merchandise, that made something hot and angry coil in Wyatt's chest. The woman sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then she stood, slow and shaky, like a newborn calf learning its legs. She didn't go to Frank's door, didn't knock or call out or demand an explanation she clearly deserved. Instead, she bent down, picked up the letter, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the pocket of her dress. Then she started walking. Not toward the house. Away from it. Down the road, south, toward nothing and nowhere, under a sun that would kill her before nightfall if she didn't have water, if she didn't have shelter, if she didn't have sense enough to know that this land didn't forgive innocence. Wyatt watched her take 10 steps. 20. 30. He cursed under his breath, looked at his unfinished gate, looked at his house where a pot of coffee was probably burning on the stove, looked at the safe, simple, uncomplicated afternoon he'd planned. Then he strode to the barn and saddled his horse. The roan mare, Ginger, snorted as he cinched the girth tight, sensing his urgency. "I know, girl," he muttered. "I know. Ain't our business. But damned if I can just watch." He swung into the saddle and urged Ginger into a lope, closing the distance between his property and the walking woman. She didn't turn at the sound of hoofbeats, just kept putting one foot in front of the other, like she was in some kind of trance. "Ma'am," Wyatt called when he was close enough. "Ma'am, hold up a minute." She stopped but didn't turn around. Her shoulders were set rigid, her head held high despite everything. Pride, Wyatt recognized. The kind of pride that was the last thing a person had when everything else was stripped away. He brought Ginger alongside her, then dismounted, holding the reins loose in one hand. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 25, with dark hair pinned up in a style that had probably been neat this morning, but was now coming loose in the heat. Her face was oval-shaped, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of storm clouds. Pretty, in a quiet way. But it was the set of her jaw that caught his attention, determined, even now, especially now. "Ma'am," he said again, gentler this time, "I don't mean to intrude, but you shouldn't be out here alone. Not with no water, no horse, no—" "I'm fine," she cut him off. Her voice was low, roughened by tears she was clearly refusing to shed. "Thank you for your concern, but I can manage." "Manage what exactly? It's 15 miles to the next town, and the sun ain't getting any cooler." She finally turned to look at him, and he saw the full weight of her dignity and her devastation all at once. "That's my concern, not yours, Mr. Collins, Wyatt Collins. I'm Frank's neighbor, West Property." He gestured vaguely behind them. Something shifted in her expression. A flicker of embarrassment, maybe, or fresh humiliation at being witnessed in her lowest moment by someone who knew Frank, who might think she deserved this somehow. "Miss," he prompted. She hesitated, then lifted her chin a fraction higher. "Bennett, Nora Bennett." "Miss Bennett," he touched the brim of his hat. "I saw what happened back there. Or enough of it anyway, and I'm telling you straight, you walk south in this heat with no provisions, you won't make it to sundown." "Perhaps that would be preferable," she said. So quietly, he almost didn't hear it. The words hit him like a fist to the gut. He studied her face, saw the tremor in her lips she was trying so hard to control, saw the way her hands were clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. "No," he said firmly. "No, ma'am, it wouldn't be. Whatever happened, whatever Frank said or did—" He stopped himself, aware he was treading on ground that wasn't his to walk on. "Look, I got a cabin about 10 minutes' ride west. It ain't much, but there's a spare room, fresh water, and shade. You can rest there, figure out your next move. No strings, no expectations, just basic human decency." She laughed then, a bitter sound that had no humor in it. Human decency. Yes, I was promised a fair amount of that in the letters, Mr. Collins. Promises seem to be worth very little out here. "Can't argue with that," Wyatt admitted. "But my offer ain't a promise, it's just a fact. You need help, and I got the means to provide it. Simple as that." Nora looked away, blinking hard against the sun, or against tears, he couldn't tell which. "I can't accept charity from a stranger." "Ain't charity, it's neighborly. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes, ma'am. Charity's what you give someone you pity. Being neighborly's what you do because it's right, regardless of feelings." He paused, then added, "And because tomorrow I might be the one who needs help, and I'd hope someone would offer the same." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon where heat waves made the distant hills look like they were breathing. Wyatt waited, giving her the space to make her own choice. He'd said his piece. Pushing harder would only drive her further into that pride that was keeping her spine straight. Finally, she looked at him again, and some of the hardness in her expression had cracked. "Just until I can arrange passage east," she said. "A day or two at most. I won't be a burden." "Never thought you would be, Miss Bennett." She nodded once, sharp and decisive, then walked back to where her trunk sat abandoned by Frank's gate. Wyatt followed, and when he lifted the trunk, heavier than it looked, packed with what he assumed was every earthly possession she had, she didn't protest, just watched with those storm-gray eyes as he secured it to the back of his saddle. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can sit a horse if that's what you're asking." "Good enough." He mounted first, then extended his hand down to her. She hesitated for just a second before taking it, and he pulled her up to sit behind him. She sat stiff as a board at first, not holding on, until Ginger shifted and she grabbed at his shirt to keep from sliding. Might want to hold on proper, Wyatt said. Ginger's gentle, but the road's got ruts. Slowly, awkwardly, Nora's arms came around his waist. He could feel her trembling, whether from fear, exhaustion, or the shock of everything that had happened he didn't know. Probably all three. All right then, he said quietly, and nudged Ginger into an easy walk. Let's get you out of this sun. They rode in silence. The only sounds, the steady clip-clop of Ginger's hooves, the creak of leather, and the whisper of wind through the prairie grass. Wyatt was acutely aware of the woman behind him, of how her grip tightened whenever they hit a rough patch, of how she was working so damn hard to keep herself together. His cabin came into view after about 10 minutes, a simple structure of wood and stone, weathered but solid, with a small barn off to one side and a corral where his other two horses, Buck and Daisy, lifted their heads to watch their approach. It wasn't much by anyone's standards, but it was his. Paid for with his own sweat and years of hard work after he'd left his family's ranch in New Mexico. No debts, no strings, no one to answer to. He reined Ginger to a stop by the front porch and dismounted, then helped Nora down. She swayed slightly when her feet hit the ground, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. You all right? Yes, she said, but her voice was faint. It's been a long day. I imagine so. He grabbed her trunk and carried it up the porch steps, shouldering the door open. Come on in, I'll get you some water. The interior of the cabin was dim and cool after the brutal sunlight. One main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a rough-hewn table with two chairs near the window. Two doors led off the main room, one to Wyatt's bedroom, one to the spare room he used for storage. Nora stood just inside the doorway, looking around like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. Wyatt set her trunk down and went to the kitchen area, pumping water into a tin cup. Here, he said, bringing it to her. Drink slow. You're probably more dehydrated than you think. She took the cup with both hands, and he noticed they were still shaking. She drank carefully, and some color started coming back to her face. The spare room's through there, Wyatt said, nodding to the left-hand door. Ain't fancy, just a bed and a chest of drawers. But it's clean, and the window catches the evening breeze. You can rest, clean up, whatever you need. Nora lowered the cup, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Helping me. You don't know me. For all you know, I could be... She stopped, searching for words. I could be trouble. Wyatt almost smiled at that. Could be. But I got a fair sense of people, Miss Bennett, and trouble don't usually look like a woman who's just had her world pulled out from under her by a coward, too spineless to face her proper. Her eyes widened slightly. You don't know what happened. Maybe there was a reason, Frank. Don't care what the reason was, Wyatt interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. He took a breath, gentled his tone. No excuse for treating a person that way. Leaving you standing there, not even having the decency to explain to your face, that ain't on you, Miss Bennett, that's on him. She looked down at the cup in her hands, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. He said in the letter that he'd found someone younger, someone more suitable, that I'd misrepresented myself, that the photograph I'd sent must have been from years ago, and that he couldn't possibly... She stopped, her throat working. Rage, white-hot and sudden, flared in Wyatt's chest. He clenched his jaw hard enough to make his teeth ache. That man's a damn fool. Nora's head snapped up. You don't have to... Ain't flattery, Miss Bennett. It's just fact. Any man who'd turn away a woman brave enough to travel halfway across the country on nothing but hope and a handful of letters, well, that man's got no sense and no honor. You're better off without him. Tears finally spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. She brushed at them angrily, like she was furious at herself for crying. I'm sorry, I don't usually... I'm not... You got nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Wyatt took a step back, giving her space. Look, I'm going to tend the horses and give you some privacy. There's bread and cold chicken in the larder if you're hungry, and the wash basin's on the dresser in the spare room. You make yourself at home, rest up, and we can talk about what comes next when you're ready. No rush. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Wyatt grabbed his hat from the peg by the door and went outside, closing it softly behind him. He stood on the porch for a moment, breathing hard, trying to settle the anger still simmering in his blood. Frank Dillard. Christ. Wyatt had never liked the man, but he hadn't figured him for this kind of cruelty. Sending for a mail-order bride, letting her travel all that way, then turning her away like spoiled goods because she didn't match some fantasy he'd built up in his head. Younger. More suitable. The words made Wyatt sick. He stalked toward the barn where Ginger was waiting to be unsaddled. He worked mechanically, removing the tack, rubbing the mare down, his mind spinning. What the hell was he going to do now? He'd acted on instinct, on basic human decency like he'd told Nora, but he hadn't thought beyond getting her out of the sun and somewhere safe. She'd said a day or two, just until she could arrange passage east. That seemed reasonable. He could manage a house guest for a couple of days, couldn't he? Keep his distance, make sure she had what she needed, and then she'd be gone and his life would go back to normal. Except even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Because he'd seen the look in her eyes when she'd said maybe walking into the desert would be preferable. He'd heard the exhaustion and defeat in her voice, seen how hard she was fighting just to keep standing. And something in him, something he'd thought he'd locked away years ago after Sarah had died, had woken up and taken notice. Not attraction, exactly. Or not just that. It was more like recognition. Like seeing someone standing in the same kind of darkness he'd once stood in, and knowing exactly how cold and lonely it was. He turned Ginger loose in the corral and leaned against the fence, watching his horses graze in the late afternoon light. Buck, the big bay gelding, came over and nosed at his pocket, looking for treats. "Ain't got nothing for you, boy," Wyatt murmured, scratching between the horse's ears. "Used up my good sense helping a stranger. Don't got much else to spare." Buck snorted and wandered off, unimpressed. Wyatt stayed there a while longer, watching the sun sink lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside the cabin, Nora Bennett was probably washing her face, unpacking her trunk, trying to piece together what was left of her dignity and her dreams. And he was out here. A man who'd sworn off complications, who'd built a life of careful solitude, wondering how the hell he'd ended up responsible for a woman who looked at him with storm cloud eyes and thanked him for basic human decency like it was some rare and precious gift. When he finally went back inside, the cabin was quiet. The spare room door was closed. Wyatt moved quietly around the kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove, putting coffee on to boil. He found the bread he'd mentioned and sliced some, laid out the cold chicken from yesterday's dinner. He was just setting plates on the table when the spare room door opened. Nora emerged looking slightly more composed. She'd unpinned her hair and braided it simply down her back, and she'd changed into a simpler dress, calico instead of the pale blue. Her face was clean, her eyes still red-rimmed but dry. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the dress. "I needed to change, and I thought—" "You don't need to explain," Wyatt said. "This is your space for as long as you need it. I made some supper, if you're hungry." She looked at the table, at the simple meal laid out, and something softened in her expression. "Thank you. You've been very kind." They sat down across from each other, and for a few minutes they ate in silence. Wyatt wasn't much for conversation at the best of times, and he figured Nora probably needed quiet more than small talk. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence two weary people could share, each caught up in their own thoughts. Finally, Nora spoke. "How long have you lived here, Mr. Collins?" "About 6 years now. And it's Wyatt, please. Mr. Collins was my father, and we didn't get along." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Wyatt, then. And you should call me Nora. I think we're past formalities, given the circumstances." "Nora." He tested the name, found he liked the sound of it. "You came from Missouri, you said?" "St. Louis. I was a seamstress there, had a small shop with my aunt. When she passed last year, I couldn't keep the business going alone. The rent was too high, the competition too fierce. I was facing some difficult choices." She looked down at her plate. "Then I saw an advertisement in the newspaper. Western men seeking respectable women for marriage. It seemed like a chance to start over, to build something new. And you picked Frank Dillard's ad." "He wrote nice letters," she said quietly. "Talked about his ranch, about building a future, about wanting a partner to share his life with. He seemed honest, steady. I thought—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong." Wyatt set down his fork, leaning back in his chair. "You weren't wrong to hope for better, Nora, and you weren't wrong to be brave enough to chase it. Frank's the one who lied, who built you up just to knock you down. That's on him, not you." She met his eyes, and he saw something shift there, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. You keep saying that. Why? Because it's true. You don't know me. For all you know, maybe I am too old for him. Maybe I did misrepresent myself. Maybe... How old are you? Wyatt asked bluntly. She blinked. 26. And Frank's what, 45, 50? He's got no room to talk about age. And as for misrepresenting yourself, did you lie in your letters? No, I told him exactly who I was, what I'd done, Then you didn't misrepresent nothing. He's just a man who got cold feet and didn't have the stones to face you like a man should. Wyatt's voice was rough with barely contained anger. You traveled near 1,000 miles on his word, and he couldn't even give you an explanation to your face. That tells me everything I need to know about his character and nothing about yours. Nora stared at him, and slowly, very slowly, some of the rigid control she'd been holding on to began to crumble. Her eyes filled again, but this time she didn't try to hide it. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I spent everything I had on the train ticket. I don't have money to go back. I don't have anywhere to go back to. I thought I was coming here to start my life, and instead Her voice broke. I'm nowhere. I'm nothing. You're not nothing. Wyatt said it with such conviction that she looked startled. You're a woman who had the courage to risk everything for a better life. That ain't nothing. That's damn near everything. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Wyatt felt helpless, useless. He was a man who knew how to fix fences and break horses and survive hard winters, but comforting a crying woman was about as far outside his skill set as you could get. Still, he couldn't just sit there. He stood, awkward and uncertain, and moved around the table. He didn't touch her, didn't think he had the right, but he pulled out the chair next to her and sat down, close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone. Listen to me, Nora, he said quietly. I know it feels like the world just ended. I know it feels like you're standing in a hole so deep you can't see daylight, but you're still standing. That counts for something. That counts for a lot. She lowered her hands, looking at him with those red, swollen eyes. How would you know? Because I've been there. The words came out before he could stop them. Different circumstances, maybe. But I've been in that hole. I felt like everything I built just crumbled to dust. And I'm here to tell you, you survive it. You keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when it feels pointless. And eventually, you find your way back to daylight. How? She asked desperately. How do you do that? Wyatt was quiet for a moment, remembering Sarah, the fever that took her, the year after where he'd barely been able to function. Remembering how he'd sold his family's ranch, left New Mexico, drifted until he found this patch of land in Texas and decided to stop running. You start small, he said finally. You don't think about the big picture, about rebuilding your whole life. You just think about the next thing, the next hour, the next day. You eat when you need to eat. You sleep when you need to sleep. You do the next task in front of you, and then the one after that. And somewhere along the way, without even noticing, you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living again. Nora was quiet, taking that in. Then she said very softly, What was in your hole, Wyatt? What crumbled for you? He almost didn't answer. It wasn't something he talked about. It wasn't something he let himself think about most days. But there was something about the rawness of this moment, about the way she'd let him see her breaking, that made him want to offer the same honesty in return. My wife, he said. Sarah. We'd been married 3 years when she got sick, fever. The doctor couldn't do nothing for it. She died in our bed while I held her hand and felt completely goddamn useless. Nora's breath caught. Oh, Wyatt, I'm so sorry. It was 8 years ago, he said. Feels like yesterday sometimes. Feels like a lifetime ago others. After she died, I didn't handle it well. Sold everything. Drifted for a couple of years. Finally ended up here and figured if I was going to keep breathing, I might as well build something worth breathing for. And did you? Build something worth it? Wyatt looked around the cabin, at the simple furniture he'd made with his own hands, at the life he'd constructed from nothing but stubbornness and survival instinct. I built something, he said. Whether it's worth anything, I'm still figuring that out. They sat in the growing darkness, neither moving to light a lamp. Outside, the crickets started their evening song, and a cool breeze finally began to blow through the open windows. Thank you, Nora said after a long while, for telling me that, for For all of this. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You didn't have to help me. You could have ridden right past, minded your own business. Most people would have. Most people ain't worth knowing then. She laughed at that. A small, watery sound, but genuine. It was the first real laugh he'd heard from her, and something about it eased the tightness in his chest. I should let you rest, Wyatt said, standing. It's been a hell of a day for you. We can talk tomorrow about what comes next, figure out your options. Nora nodded, standing as well. She swayed slightly, exhaustion finally catching up with her, and Wyatt steadied her with a hand on her arm. I'm all right, she said, but she didn't pull away immediately. Just tired. Then sleep. The world ain't going nowhere. Your problems will still be there in the morning, and you'll be stronger to face them after some rest. She looked up at him, and in the dim light, her eyes were shadowed but searching. You're a good man, Wyatt Collins. Don't let anyone tell you different. Before he could respond, she turned and went to the spare room, closing the door softly behind her. Wyatt stood there in the dark cabin, her words echoing in his head. A good man. He didn't feel like a good man. He felt like someone who'd acted on impulse, who'd complicated his simple life by taking in a stranger who was probably going to regret this whole thing in about 48 hours. But as he finally lit a lamp and settled into his own room, he couldn't quite convince himself that regret was what he was feeling. What he felt was something else entirely, something he hadn't felt in 8 years. He felt needed. And against all his better judgment, that didn't feel like a burden. It felt like waking up. The next morning came soft and quiet, dawn light filtering through the cabin windows in shades of gold and rose. Wyatt woke to the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen, soft footsteps, the quiet clink of dishes. He dressed quickly and emerged from his room to find Nora at the stove, her hair still in the simple braid from yesterday, wearing the same calico dress. She'd gotten the fire going and was making coffee, and the smell of it filled the cabin like a promise. She turned when she heard him, looking uncertain. I hope you don't mind. I woke early and thought I could at least make myself useful. Don't mind at all, Wyatt said, moving to the table. Though you're a guest here. You don't need to. I can't just sit idle, she interrupted, then caught herself. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be presumptuous. It's just, I need to do something. I need to feel like I'm not completely helpless. Wyatt understood that, pride and purpose. Sometimes they were all a person had to hold on to. Coffee sounds good then. Thank you. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, drinking coffee and not saying much. Wyatt found himself watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. The way she held her cup with both hands, like she was trying to warm herself despite the growing heat of the day, the way her eyes kept drifting to the window, like she was looking for something she couldn't quite name. I've been thinking, Nora said finally, setting down her cup, about what you said last night, about taking things small, one step at a time. And I think my first step needs to be finding work. Some way to earn passage back east, or at least to another town where I might have better prospects. She met his eyes, her jaw set with determination. I won't impose on your hospitality longer than absolutely necessary. A few days at most, just until I can figure out where to go from here. Wyatt nodded slowly. What kind of work you looking for? I'm a seamstress, like I said, a good one. But I don't know if there's much call for that out here. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm willing to do whatever needs doing. Red Mesa ain't much of a town, Wyatt said honestly. General store, saloon, church, handful of houses. Don't know that they'd have much in the way of seamstress work. But I could take you in tomorrow. Ask around. Someone might need help. Tomorrow? Well, it's already near noon today, and he hesitated, not wanting to overstep. And I thought maybe you could use another day to rest. Get your strength back. The world's still going to be there tomorrow, like I said. Nora looked like she wanted to argue, but then she just nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. All right, tomorrow then. The rest of that day passed in a kind of quiet companionship that surprised them both. Wyatt went about his usual chores, tending the horses, checking the fence line, chopping wood for the stove. Nora stayed close to the cabin, but he'd see her occasionally, sitting on the porch with some mending she'd found in his things, or walking slowly around the property like she was trying to memorize every detail. Late in the afternoon, he found her standing by the corral, watching Buck and Daisy. They're beautiful, she said when he approached. I've never been this close to horses before. Never? I grew up in the city. The closest I got to horses was seeing them pull carriages down the street. She reached out tentatively toward Buck, who'd wandered over to investigate. Is he friendly? Buck? He's a sweetheart, just nosy. Wyatt opened the gate and led her inside. Here, give him this, flat palm. Don't curl your fingers. He placed a piece of carrot in her hand, and she offered it nervously. Buck took it gently, his lips soft against her palm, and Nora's face lit up with surprised delight. Oh, that tickles! Wyatt found himself smiling. Want to pet him? Just stroke down his nose, nice and slow. She did, cautious at first, then with more confidence as Buck stood patient and still. He's so soft. I didn't expect that. They look tough, but they're gentle creatures mostly. Long as you treat them right, they'll give you everything they got. Nora looked at him over Buck's head. Is that true of all creatures, do you think? Or just horses? There was something in the question that felt like it reached beyond the words. Wyatt held her gaze, saw the vulnerability there, the hope she was trying so hard not to feel. I'd like to think so, he said quietly. Though people are more complicated than horses. Harder to predict, harder to trust. Yes, she agreed softly. They are. They stood there in the golden afternoon light, the horses grazing peacefully around them, and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or just the simple recognition that they were both people who'd been hurt, who'd learned to be careful, who'd built walls to keep the world at a safe distance. But walls could be lonely too. That evening, Nora insisted on making supper. Wyatt tried to argue, but she was determined, so he let her take over the kitchen while he cleaned up from the day's work. The cabin filled with the smell of cooking, salt pork and beans, biscuits baking in the oven. And when they sat down to eat, Wyatt realized it was the first real meal he'd had in this house that he hadn't cooked himself in years. This is good, he said, and meant it. Real good. Nora flushed with pleasure. It's nothing fancy. Don't need fancy, just need good, and this is that. They talked more easily this time, the conversation flowing without the weight of yesterday's trauma pressing down on every word. Nora told him about St. Louis, about her aunt who'd taught her to sew, about the little shop they'd run together. Wyatt told her about the ranch, about his plans to expand the herd next year, about the challenges of making a living from this hard land. It was comfortable, easy, and that should have been a warning, should have made Wyatt pull back, but instead he found himself leaning in. When they finished eating, Nora started clearing the dishes, but Wyatt stopped her. You cooked, I'll clean, fair's fair. We could do it together, she suggested. Make it go faster. So they did, working side by side in the small kitchen. Nora washed, Wyatt dried, and they fell into a rhythm that felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Can I ask you something? Nora said as she handed him a plate. Sure. Yesterday when you found me, why did you really stop? You said it was human decency, being neighborly, but... She paused, searching for words. There was something else, wasn't there? Something that made you help me when you could have just ridden past. Wyatt was quiet for a moment, drying the plate slowly. You really want to know? I do. It was the way you stood up, he said finally. After Frank left you there, after you read that letter and your whole world fell apart, you still stood up. You didn't beg. You didn't go pounding on his door demanding answers you deserved. You just stood up and started walking. There was dignity in that, strength, and I guess I couldn't stand the thought of watching that strength get swallowed up by this land, because some coward couldn't see what he had standing right in front of him. Nora had stopped washing, her hands still in the water. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. You saw all that in a few moments? She asked. Didn't need more than a few moments. Some things, you just know. She turned back to the dishes, but her hands were trembling slightly. My mother used to say I was too proud for my own good, said it would be my downfall. Pride ain't a bad thing, long as it don't make you stupid. Your kind of pride, the kind that keeps you standing when everything's telling you to fall, that's worth having. Even when it leaves you alone? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Wyatt set down the dish and the towel, turning to face her fully. Being alone ain't the same as being lonely, Nora. I've been alone 8 years, and most days I'm fine with that. But lonely, that's different. That's what happens when you're surrounded by people who don't see you, who don't know you, who don't give a damn about the person you really are. He paused. Frank left you alone on that road, But I'd bet my ranch you were lonelier in those letters he wrote you, pretending to be someone he wasn't, than you've ever been standing on your own 2 feet being exactly who you are. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't brush it away this time. How do you do that? Do what? Say exactly what I need to hear, even when I didn't know I needed to hear it. Wyatt shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just saying what's true. She dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him fully. They were standing close in the small kitchen, closer than they'd been before, and Wyatt was suddenly acutely aware of every detail, the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair, the way her eyes were still shining with unshed tears, the way she was looking at him like he'd just handed her something precious. Thank you, she said softly. For everything, for stopping, for bringing me here, for making me feel like maybe I'm not as broken as I thought I was. You're not broken, Nora. You're just hurt. There's a difference. Is there? It doesn't feel like it right now. There is. Broken things can't be fixed. Hurt things heal. Given time and the right care, they heal just fine. She held his gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them, something electric and dangerous and full of possibility. Wyatt felt it like a physical pull, drawing him toward her, and for a heartbeat, he thought about closing that last bit of distance, about finding out if her lips were as soft as they looked. But he didn't, because she was vulnerable right now, hurting and lost and looking for something solid to hold on to. And he wouldn't take advantage of that, wouldn't let her reach for him when she might just be reaching for anyone who offered kindness in the midst of her pain. So instead, he stepped back, breaking the moment gently. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day if we're riding into town. Disappointment flickered across her face, there and gone so quick he might have imagined it, but she nodded, composing herself. Yes, you're right. Good night, Wyatt. Good night, Nora. She went to her room, and Wyatt stood in the kitchen for a long time after, staring at nothing, trying to convince himself he'd done the right thing, trying to ignore the part of him that whispered he was a damned fool. Morning came too early, and not early enough. Wyatt had spent half the night staring at the ceiling of his room, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling, acutely aware that just one wall away, Nora was sleeping in his spare room. Or maybe she wasn't sleeping either. Maybe she was lying awake too, thinking about that moment in the kitchen when the air between them had felt charged with something neither of them was ready to name. He gave up on sleep around dawn and dressed quietly, slipping out to tend the horses before the heat of the day set in. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of Texas morning that made a man forget how brutal the afternoons could be. Buck nickered softly when Wyatt approached, and he spent a few minutes brushing down the bay gelding, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of the work. Getting complicated in there, boy, he murmured to the horse. Woman shows up out of nowhere, turns my whole routine upside down, and now I'm supposed to take her into town and help her leave. Smart thing would be to keep my distance, let her go her own way. Smart thing would be to remember that caring about people just leads to hurt. Buck snorted and bumped his nose against Wyatt's chest, as if to say that being smart was overrated. Yeah, well, you would say that. You're a horse. You don't know nothing about... About what? Wyatt spun around to find Nora standing at the corral fence, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and in the early light, she looked younger somehow, less burdened. Didn't hear you come out, Wyatt said, feeling caught. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. I woke up and heard you out here, and I thought... She trailed off, looking uncertain. I can go back inside if you want to be alone. No, it's fine. Just talking to Buck here. He's a good listener, doesn't talk back. A small smile touched Nora's lips. What were you telling him? Wyatt felt heat creep up the back of his neck. Nothing important, just thinking out loud. She didn't press, just came through the gate when he opened it for her and walked over to where Daisy stood munching hay. They really are beautiful. I think I could watch them all day and never get tired of it. They're good company, honest company. A horse don't pretend to be something it ain't. Unlike people. Yeah, unlike people. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Finally, Nora spoke, her voice soft but steady. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about being hurt versus being broken. And I think you're right. I'm not broken. I'm angry. That's what I realized lying awake last night. I'm so angry I can barely breathe sometimes. Wyatt turned to look at her. Angry at Frank? At Frank? At myself. at the whole world for making it so hard for a woman to have choices, to have a life that's her own. Her hands tightened on the fence rail. Do you know what it's like to feel like your only options are to marry a stranger or starve? To know that everything you worked for, everything you built, can be taken away because you don't have a man's name attached to yours? No, Wyatt said honestly. I can't know what that's like, but I can see it ain't fair. I can see it ain't right. Frank's letter said I misrepresented myself. But the truth is, he misrepresented the world. He made it sound like out here, a woman could be a partner, could be valued for more than just being young and pretty and available. But it's the same everywhere, isn't it? Just packaged differently. The bitterness in her voice cut deep. Wyatt wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that not all men were like Frank, that there were good people who valued character over appearance. But he also knew that his words, no matter how sincere, couldn't change what she'd experienced, couldn't undo the betrayal she'd suffered. Maybe it is the same everywhere, he said finally. Or maybe you just had the misfortune of meeting the wrong person first. Either way, you got a right to be angry. Just don't let it turn you hard, Nora. Don't let it make you stop believing that somewhere out there, there's something better waiting. She looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw the question in her eyes before she asked it. Do you still believe that? After losing your wife, after everything you've been through, do you still believe there's something better waiting? Wyatt opened his mouth to give her some platitude, some easy answer that would comfort without revealing too much. But standing there in the morning light with this woman who'd been nothing but honest with him, he found he couldn't lie. I don't know, he admitted. Most days I think I'm content with what I got. This land, these horses, the work. It's enough. It's safe. But then sometimes, he stopped, struggling to find the words. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just hiding. If I'm calling it peace when it's really just emptiness with better lighting. Nora's expression softened. You're not empty, Wyatt. You're one of the fullest people I've ever met. You're just careful. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Empty people don't notice when someone's hurting. They don't stop to help strangers. They don't say the exact right thing at the exact right time. You're not empty. You're just protecting something precious. Yourself, your heart. I understand that. I think I'm going to have to learn to do the same. Something about the sadness in her voice when she said it made Wyatt's chest tighten. The thought of this woman, who'd been brave enough to cross half a country chasing hope, closing herself off, building walls, becoming someone careful and guarded. It felt wrong. Like watching a wildflower try to turn itself into stone. Don't, he said, more forcefully than he intended. Don't do that. Don't let what Frank did change who you are. How can it not? How can I ever trust my own judgment again? I thought I knew him from his letters. I thought I was making a smart choice, a safe choice. And I was completely, utterly wrong. If I can't trust myself to know the difference between a good man and a liar, then what hope do I have? Wyatt turned to face her fully, and before he could think better of it, he reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her with intention, not just to steady her or help her down from a horse, and the contact sent something electric up his arm. You listen to me, Nora Bennett. Frank didn't fool you because you're stupid or naive. He fooled you because he's a practiced liar, because he knew exactly what a desperate woman wanted to hear, and he fed it to you in carefully written letters. That's on him, not you. Your judgment ain't broken. You just met someone who was real good at deception. How do you know? How can you be so sure? Because I've seen you make decisions since you got here. You decided to accept help when it was offered, even though your pride told you not to. You decided to stay when leaving would have killed you. You decided to look for work instead of giving up. Every choice you've made since Frank left you on that road has been smart and strong and right. Your judgment's just fine, Nora. You just need to start trusting it again. She stared at their joined hands, and when she looked back up at him, her eyes were shining. Why are you so good to me? You don't owe me anything. You don't even know me. I'm getting to know you, Wyatt said quietly. And what I'm learning, I like. You're brave and honest and stronger than you know. Any man who couldn't see, that ain't worth a second of your time. Nora's breath hitched, and for a moment, Wyatt thought she might cry. But instead, she squeezed his hand and said, We should get ready for town. The sooner I find work, the sooner I can start putting my life back together. It was the right thing to say, the practical thing, so why did it feel like a door closing? Wyatt released her hand and nodded. I'll hitch up the wagon. Be ready to leave in an hour. I'll be ready. They rode into Red Mesa in the wagon, with Ginger tied to the back. The town was exactly as Wyatt had described, small and dusty, a handful of buildings clustered around a single main street. The general store sat on one corner, the saloon on another, and the church stood at the far end like a white sentinel watching over everything. As they rolled down the street, Wyatt noticed the stairs. People stopped what they were doing to watch them pass. Mrs. Henderson sweeping her porch, old Charlie sitting outside the saloon, even Reverend Matthews pausing in his walk to the church. Of course they were staring. Wyatt Collins, who came to town once a month for supplies and otherwise kept to himself, was suddenly riding in with an unknown woman sitting beside him. The gossip would be spreading before they even stopped the wagon. "They're all looking at us," Nora said quietly, her hands twisted in her lap. "Small town. Not much happens here. We're the most interesting thing they've seen in weeks. Should I be worried? About their staring? Nah. About their talking? Maybe a little. But talk's just noise, Nora. It can't hurt you unless you let it." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store and helped Nora down. The proprietor, Samuel Yates, was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them with undisguised curiosity. "Wyatt," Samuel said by way of greeting, "didn't expect to see you till next week. Got some business in town. This is Miss Nora Bennett. She's looking for work. Thought you might know if anyone's hiring." Samuel's eyes slid to Nora, assessing. "What kind of work you looking for, miss?" Nora lifted her chin and Wyatt recognized that gesture, the pride that kept her standing. "I'm a seamstress by trade, but I'm willing to do whatever needs doing. Cooking, cleaning, mending. I'm a hard worker and honest." "A seamstress, huh?" Samuel scratched his chin. "Don't get much call for that here. Most folks make do with what they got. But," he paused, considering, "Martha Jenkins over at the boarding house could use some help. Her arthritis has been acting up something fierce. Can't manage all the washing and cooking like she used to." "The boarding house," Nora repeated, looking at Wyatt. "Is it far?" "2 streets over. I can take you there." "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Yates. Thank you." Samuel nodded, but his eyes were sharp with questions he wasn't asking. "She's staying with you, Wyatt?" And there it was. The question that would determine how this town saw Nora, how they treated her, whether they'd even consider giving her work. Wyatt felt Nora tense beside him, felt the weight of the moment. He could lie, could say she was a cousin visiting, could spin some story that would protect her reputation. But lies had brought Nora here in the first place, and he wouldn't add to that burden. "She's a guest in my home temporarily," Wyatt said, his voice carrying a note of steel. "She came out here on false pretenses, got left high and dry by a man who ain't worth naming. I'm helping her get on her feet. Anyone got a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Samuel's eyebrows shot up, and Wyatt saw the exact moment the storekeeper made his decision about what kind of woman Nora was, what kind of situation this was. To his credit, Samuel just nodded slowly. "No problem here, Wyatt, just making conversation. You take Miss Bennett over to Martha's. I'll let her know you're coming." As they walked back to the wagon, Nora was silent. Wyatt helped her up, then climbed up beside her, very aware of the eyes still following them. "You shouldn't have said that," Nora said once they were moving again. "You shouldn't have made it sound like there's something improper happening. Your reputation." "My reputation can handle it. Question is, can yours? Because I won't lie about you, Nora. I won't make up some story to make you more palatable to people who don't know the first thing about you. You deserve better than that." "I deserve—" She laughed, a bitter sound. "Wyatt, I don't think you understand how this works. A woman's reputation is everything. Without it, I'm nothing. No one will hire me, no one will help me. You just told the biggest gossip in town that I'm staying with you, unmarried, unchaperoned. Do you know what that makes me in their eyes? Makes you a woman who needed help and got it. Anyone who thinks different ain't worth concerning yourself with." "Easy for you to say. You're a man. Your reputation doesn't hinge on where you sleep or who you talk to or whether you smile too much or not enough. Mine does, and you just—" She pressed her hands to her face. "I need to find work, Wyatt. I need to earn money to leave, and you just made that so much harder." Guilt twisted in Wyatt's gut. She was right. He knew she was right. He'd let his anger at Frank, at the unfairness of it all, at the way this town would judge her, get in the way of what she actually needed. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're right. I should have thought before I spoke. Should have asked you what you wanted me to say. It's done now. We'll just have to hope that Martha Jenkins is either deaf or doesn't care about gossip. Martha Jenkins turned out to be neither deaf nor unconcerned about gossip, but she was desperate. The boarding house was a 2-story building that had seen better days, paint peeling, porch sagging, but still standing proud. Martha herself was a woman in her 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with hands so twisted by arthritis they looked like gnarled tree roots. She listened to Nora's pitch with pursed lips, her gaze traveling from Nora's face to Wyatt standing behind her, then back again. "So you're the woman Frank Dillard sent for," Martha said bluntly. "Heard about that. Heard he took one look at you and sent you packing." Nora's back went rigid, but her voice stayed steady. "Yes, ma'am, that's what happened. And now you're staying with Wyatt Collins." "Temporarily, just until I can earn enough to move on." Martha snorted. "Temporarily, right. And I suppose nothing improper is happening out there." "Ma'am," Wyatt started, but Nora cut him off. "What happens or doesn't happen at Mr. Collins' home is between him, me, and God," Nora said, and there was steel in her voice now. "But since you're asking directly, I'll answer directly. Mr. Collins has been nothing but a gentleman. He gave me shelter when I had none, food when I was hungry, and kindness when the world had shown me nothing but cruelty. If you want to judge that, go ahead. But know that your judgment says more about you than it does about me." Martha's eyes widened, and for a moment the boarding house fell silent. Then, unexpectedly, the older woman laughed. "Got some spine, don't you? Good. You'll need it working here. I got 8 rooms, 6 of them occupied by miners and railroad workers who think cleaning up after themselves is women's work. I need someone who can cook 3 meals a day, keep the rooms clean, do the washing, and not take any guff from men who think being rough gives them the right to be rude. Pay's not great, room, board, and $2 a week, but it's honest work." Nora's eyes lit up with hope. "I'll take it. When can I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. sharp. You'll room upstairs, 3rd door on the left. It ain't fancy, but it's clean and private." Martha paused, her gaze softening just slightly. "And for what it's worth, girl, Frank Dillard's a fool. I've known him 20 years, and he's always been the kind of man who wants perfection, but wouldn't know it if it bit him on the ass. You're better off without him." "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. Wait till you've dealt with a week of miners tracking mud through the house and demanding biscuits at midnight. Now get on out of here. I'll see you tomorrow." They walked back to the wagon in silence. Wyatt could feel the tension radiating off Nora, could see the way she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. It wasn't until they were out of town, heading back toward his ranch, that she finally spoke. "So that's it then. Tomorrow I start work, and this whole nightmare chapter of my life can start to close." "You don't sound happy about it." "I'm grateful for the opportunity. Martha's giving me a chance when she didn't have to. It's more than I had this morning." "But?" Nora was quiet for a long moment. "But it's not what I came here for, is it? I came here to build a life, to have a partnership, to be more than just a servant. And now I'm going to be cleaning up after miners and cooking meals for strangers, saving pennies until I can afford to leave and start over somewhere else. It's not a life. It's just survival." Wyatt understood that feeling, understood it bone deep, because wasn't that what he'd been doing for 8 years? Just surviving, just going through the motions, calling it peace when it was really just an absence of pain? "Maybe survival's enough for now," he said. "Maybe you build the life you want one small piece at a time, starting with just staying alive and moving forward." "Is that what you're doing? Building a life one piece at a time?" "I thought I was. Now I'm not so sure." She turned to look at him, and in the afternoon light her eyes were the color of smoke. "What changed?" "You," he wanted to say. "You walked into my carefully constructed solitude and made me remember what it feels like to care about someone beyond myself. You made me angry on your behalf, protective, hopeful. You made me feel things I thought I'd buried with Sarah. But he couldn't say any of that. It was too much, too soon, too complicated. So instead he said, 'Nothing changed. I'm just thinking out loud again.'" They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was different now, heavier, loaded with all the things they weren't saying. When they reached the ranch, Wyatt helped Nora down from the wagon and unhitched Ginger. Nora stood on the porch, looking at the cabin like she was trying to memorize it. "This is my last night here," she said when Wyatt joined her. "Tomorrow, I'll be at Martha's boarding house, and you'll have your life back. Your routine. your peace and quiet. Yeah, Wyatt said, but the word felt hollow. I should pack my things. Get ready for tomorrow. Nora, she turned to face him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Thank you, Wyatt, for everything. I'll never forget what you did for me. The kindness you showed when I needed it most. You saved my life, and I don't just mean from the heat and the road. You saved me from giving up, from believing that all men are like Frank, that all hope is foolish. You gave me something to hold on to when I had nothing, so thank you. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and soft, then turned and went inside before he could respond. Wyatt stood on the porch, his hand coming up to touch the spot where her lips had been, and felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept locked and sealed for 8 long years. He was falling for her. God help him, he was falling for Nora Bennett, and tomorrow she'd be gone. That night, they moved around each other like ghosts, both hyper-aware that this was their last evening together. Nora cooked dinner, a better meal than Wyatt usually bothered with, using up the last of the vegetables from his small garden. They ate mostly in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on them. After dinner, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was on fire, streaked with orange and purple and red, the kind of sunset that made poets write bad verses and religious men see God. It's beautiful here, Nora said softly. I can see why you chose this place. It's quiet, peaceful, or it was anyway. She glanced at him. Was. Before you showed up and disrupted everything. He meant it as a joke, but it came out more serious than he intended. Nora looked down at her hands. I'm sorry, I never meant to. I didn't say it was a bad thing. Wyatt cut her off. Just different. You made me remember what it's like to have someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share meals with, someone who... He trailed off, not sure how to finish. Someone who what? Someone who makes the silence feel less empty. Nora's breath caught. Wyatt, you asked me this morning if I still believed something better was waiting. I said I didn't know, but sitting here with you, watching the sunset, I think maybe I do believe it, or I want to. You make me want to believe it. Don't, she whispered. Please don't say things like that. Why not? It's true. Because it makes leaving harder. Because I have to leave, Wyatt. I have to make my own way, earn my own money, prove to myself that I can survive without depending on anyone. I can't stay here and let you take care of me. That's not who I am. I know that's not who you are. You're strong and independent and you don't need anyone to save you. But that don't mean you have to face everything alone, Nora. That don't mean you can't let someone stand beside you while you figure things out. She turned to face him fully, and in the dying light she looked ethereal, fragile and strong all at once. What are you saying? I'm saying don't go to Martha's tomorrow. Stay here. Work the ranch with me. I can't pay you much, but you'd have room and board, and you wouldn't have to answer to anyone but yourself. You could save money, figure out your next steps, and you'd be safe. No minors harassing you, no gossip, just us, working together. Wyatt, that would make the gossip so much worse. People already think, I don't give a damn what people think. Let them talk. Let them assume whatever they want. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's all that matters. Is it? Is it really? Because that kind of talk can ruin me, Wyatt. It can make it so I never get another chance, never find another position. Your reputation might survive, but mine won't. Then marry me. The words fell out of his mouth before his brain could catch up with them. They hung in the air between them, shocking them both into silence. What? Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Wyatt's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. What the hell had he just done? But as he looked at Nora's stunned face, as he felt the rightness of it settle into his bones, he realized he meant it. He actually meant it. Marry me, he said again, steadier this time. Not because you need saving, not because you don't have other options, but because these past few days, having you here, getting to know you, it's woken something up in me I thought was dead. You make me laugh, you make me think, you make me want to be better than I am. And I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I also know that sometimes you just recognize something when it's standing right in front of you. And I recognize you, Nora. I recognize what we could be together. Tears were streaming down Nora's face now. Wyatt, you can't. We barely know each other. A few days ago, I was promised to another man. I can't just. I'm not Frank. I won't write you pretty lies or make promises I can't keep. What I'm offering is real. A partnership. A life we build together on our own terms. You want to work? Work beside me. You want independence? Have it. You want to say in every decision, every plan, every dream? It's yours. I'm not asking you to be some perfect vision of a wife. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, right here, with me. You don't know who I am. Not really. You know who I've been for 3 days, but I know enough. I know you're brave enough to cross the country for a chance at something better. I know you're strong enough to stand up when everything tries to knock you down. I know you're honest and kind and you see people, really see them. You saw me, Nora. In just 3 days, you saw me clearer than anyone has in 8 years. That's not nothing. That's everything. Nora was shaking her head, but she wasn't pulling away. I came here for the wrong reasons. I came here because I was desperate and scared and I thought marriage was my only option. I can't make the same mistake twice. I can't. This ain't the same. You know it ain't. Frank was a stranger with pretty words. I'm just a man who's asking you to take a chance on something real. On someone who sees you and values you and wants to build a life where we both get to be free. Where we both get to be whole. Free, she repeated, and her voice broke on the word. How can I be free if I'm tied to another man? Another set of expectations? Another... Because I'm offering you a choice, Nora. Right now, right here. No pressure, no demands. Just a question. Stay with me. Build something with me. Let me stand beside you while you become whoever you want to be. And if someday you decide you want to leave, if you decide this ain't what you want, then I'll help you go. No bitterness, no recriminations, just respect for the time we had and hope that you find what you're looking for. She stared at him, tears still falling, and Wyatt could see the war raging inside her. Fear and hope, doubt and desire. The need to protect herself warring with the need to believe in something again. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared, Wyatt. What if I'm wrong again? What if... Then we'll be wrong together. But at least we'll be honest about it. At least we'll try. The sun had set completely now, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. An owl called somewhere in the distance, and the night breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. Nora took a shaking breath, then another. Then she said so quietly he almost didn't hear it, All right. All right? All right, I'll stay. I'll marry you. But Wyatt, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if I change my mind, if I wake up one day and realize I made another mistake, you'll let me go. No guilt, no manipulation, just freedom. Can you promise me that? It would kill him, Wyatt knew. If she left, it would break something in him that might never heal. But looking at her tear-stained face, seeing the vulnerability and the courage it took for her to even consider staying, he knew there was only one answer he could give. I promise. Your freedom is yours, Nora. Always. I won't ever take that from you. She nodded, and then, before he could prepare himself, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Wyatt held her, feeling her tremble, feeling his own heart racing like a wild thing. Thank you, she murmured against his shirt. Thank you for seeing me, for giving me a choice, for making me believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserve something good. You deserve everything good, Nora Bennett, and I'm going to spend every day trying to give it to you. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, two broken people who'd found something worth healing for. And for the first time in 8 years, Wyatt Collins felt something that resembled hope blooming in his chest. The next morning brought clarity and doubt in equal measure. Wyatt woke before dawn, as always, and lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd lost his mind. He'd proposed to a woman he'd known for 3 days. 3 days. Sarah he'd courted for 2 years before asking for her hand, and now here he was, planning to marry a virtual stranger because she made him feel alive again. But when he emerged from his room and found Nora already up, making coffee in the kitchen with her hair braided and her sleeves rolled up, looking like she belonged there, all his doubts quieted. She turned when she heard him, and her smile was tentative but real. Morning. I hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd make myself useful. You're allowed to just exist here, Nora. You don't have to earn your keep every minute. I know, I need to feel like I'm contributing something. It's how I'm built, I guess. Wyatt crossed to the table and sat down. We should talk. About yesterday. About what happens next. Nora poured 2 cups of coffee and joined him. I've been thinking about that all night, about what I agreed to. And Wyatt, I don't want you to think I'm not grateful, because I am. But I also need to be honest with you. His stomach dropped. You changed your mind. No, not about staying, not about trying this, but I need you to understand something. I don't love you. The word should have stung, but Wyatt found himself nodding. I know. And I don't know if I can. Love you, I mean. Not right now, maybe not for a long time. I'm still so angry at Frank, still so hurt and confused, and I don't trust my own feelings. Everything's all tangled up inside me, and I can't. Nora, stop. Wyatt reached across the table and took her hand. I don't expect you to love me. Hell, I'm not even sure what I feel for you is love. Maybe it is. Maybe it's just loneliness and attraction, and the fact that you make me laugh. I don't know. But here's what I do know. We don't have to figure it all out right now. We can take this slow. Build something real from the ground up. No expectations, no pressure, just 2 people trying to make something good out of a bad situation. You really mean that? I do. Look, my proposal yesterday wasn't romantic. It was practical. You need a home and a name that'll protect you from gossip. I need someone to remind me I'm alive. That seems like a fair trade to me. If love comes later, if we find something deeper along the way, then we'll be lucky. And if we don't, if we just end up being good partners and friends, then that's still more than most people get. Nora's eyes searched his face. You're a strange man, Wyatt Collins. Most men would want promises of love and devotion. I'm not most men, and I've learned that promises don't mean much when they're based on fantasy. Better to start with honesty and see where it takes us. She squeezed his hand. All right then, honesty. I can do that. So here's my first honest thing. I'm terrified. Of this, of you, of what happens if I stay and it all falls apart. But I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life wondering, what if? So I'm staying. Not because I love you, but because I want to see who I could become here, with you. Is that enough? It's more than enough, Wyatt said, and meant it. It's everything. They spent the rest of the morning talking through practicalities. They'd go into town that afternoon and see Reverend Matthews about getting married. Quiet, simple, no fuss. Nora would send word to Martha Jenkins that she wouldn't be taking the position, and they'd face whatever gossip came together. People are going to talk, Nora warned as they hitched up the wagon. They're going to say, I'm desperate, that you're a fool, that this is bound to fail. Let them say whatever they want. We know the truth. And what's the truth, Wyatt? What are we really doing here? He thought about that as he helped her into the wagon. What were they doing? Grabbing at hope? Building something from broken pieces? Trying to outrun their own loneliness? We're surviving, he said finally. Together. And maybe, if we're lucky, somewhere along the way, we'll figure out how to live again too. The ride into Red Mesa was different this time. The air felt charged with possibility and fear. Nora sat close beside him, not quite touching, but near enough that Wyatt could feel her warmth, and he found himself acutely aware of every breath she took, every small movement she made. When they reached the church, Reverend Matthews was in his garden, tending to a sad collection of vegetables that were barely surviving the Texas heat. Wyatt, the Reverend called out, straightening up with obvious relief at the interruption. Didn't expect to see you today. And Miss Bennett, isn't it? Samuel mentioned you were looking for work. Change of plans, Reverend, Wyatt said, helping Nora down. We'd like to get married. Today, if possible. Reverend Matthews' eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. Married. Today. You too. Yes, sir. Son, you do know that marriage is a sacred covenant, not to be entered into lightly. You've known this woman for what, a few days? 3 days, sir, and I know it's fast. I know folks will talk, but I also know that Miss Bennett needs protection from gossip and speculation, and I can provide that. We're both going into this with clear eyes and honest intentions. That's more than a lot of marriages start with. The Reverend looked between them, his expression skeptical. Miss Bennett, is this what you want? Because if you're being pressured in any way— I'm not being pressured, Reverend, Nora said firmly. Mr. Collins has been nothing but honorable. This is my choice. And you understand what you're agreeing to? That marriage is permanent, that divorce is— Reverend Matthews, Wyatt interrupted, his voice carrying a note of warning. We understand what marriage is. We're asking for your blessing and your service, not a lecture on commitment. Will you marry us or not?" The Reverend was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between them. Then he sighed. "I'll marry you, but not today. I'll need to post banns, make it proper. Give you time to make sure this is really what you want. 2 weeks. Come back in 2 weeks, and if you're both still of the same mind, I'll perform the ceremony." 2 weeks. It was longer than Wyatt wanted to wait, but he could see the wisdom in it. Time to be sure. Time for Nora to back out if she needed to. Time to prove to themselves and the town that this was real. 2 weeks then, Wyatt agreed. "Thank you, Reverend." As they walked back to the wagon, Nora was quiet. Wyatt could practically hear her thinking, could see the doubt creeping back in. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "Constant second thoughts," she admitted. "But I'm trying to remember what you said about taking it one step at a time. Right now, the next step is 2 weeks of what exactly? Playing house? Pretending we're something we're not? Or figuring out what we actually are," Wyatt suggested. 2 weeks to get to know each other better, to see if we can actually stand living together, to build something real before we make it official. And if we can't? If we realize in 2 weeks that this is a terrible idea? Then we call it off. No harm done. Well, except to my pride, but I'll survive. She laughed at that, a real laugh, and something loosened in Wyatt's chest. They were going to be okay, maybe not in the way either of them had expected, but okay nonetheless. The 2 weeks that followed were unlike anything Wyatt had experienced. Having Nora in his home, knowing she was staying, changed everything. They fell into a routine, Wyatt handling the outside work, Nora taking over the house and garden. But it wasn't rigid. Often, Nora would come out to help with the horses, and Wyatt found himself in the kitchen more, drawn by the smell of whatever she was cooking, by the simple pleasure of her company. They talked. God, how they talked. About everything and nothing. Nora told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her parents who'd died when she was young, about the aunt who'd raised her and taught her to sew. Wyatt told her about his childhood in New Mexico, about his father's ranch, about Sarah and the life they'd almost had. "Do you still love her?" Nora asked one evening as they sat on the porch. It was their routine now, watching the sunset together, sharing the quiet. "I'll always love who she was," Wyatt said carefully. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm holding on to a memory more than a person. If I've made her into something perfect in my head because it's easier than accepting that she was human, that we probably would have had hard times and disagreements and all the messy parts of a real marriage. That's very honest of you. You asked for honesty. That's what we're building here, right? Something real. Can't do that with pretty lies." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone?" "Of course." "I'm relieved. About Frank rejecting me. Is that terrible? At first I was devastated, humiliated, but then once the shock wore off, I realized I didn't want to marry him either. I was doing it because I thought I had to, because I was afraid of being alone and poor and desperate. But I didn't actually want him. I wanted what he represented: safety, security, a future. The man himself? I never even thought about whether I'd enjoy his company, whether we'd laugh together, whether he'd see me as a partner or just a convenience. That's not terrible. That's just honest. But I traveled all that way to marry a man I didn't even really want. What does that say about me? Says you were scared and doing the best you could with bad options. Don't make it more than it is, Nora." She looked at him in the fading light. "And what about you? What about us? Are you my bad option that I'm settling for because I'm scared?" The question hit harder than Wyatt expected. Was he? Was this whole thing just two desperate people clinging to each other because it was easier than being alone? "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe. But I'd like to think we could be more than that. Given time, given a real chance, maybe we could be something good." "Something good," she repeated softly. "That's all I want, Wyatt. Just something good. Something real. I don't need perfect. I don't need passion or romance or any of those fairy tale promises. I just need honest and kind and real. I can do that. I can do honest and kind and real." She smiled, and in that moment, with the last light painting her face in gold, Wyatt felt something shift. Not love, not yet, but something that could become love given time and care and cultivation. They were planting seeds. That's what they were doing, planting seeds and hoping something good would grow. The 10th day arrived with clouds building on the horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. Wyatt stood in the barn mending a broken saddle strap when he heard the horse approaching. He looked up to see Frank Dillard riding into his yard, sitting tall on that black gelding he was so proud of, his face set hard as stone. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He set down the leather and walked out to meet him, very aware that Nora was in the house, probably watching from the window. "Frank," he said, his voice flat, "you got business here?" Frank dismounted, his movements sharp with anger. "Heard some interesting talk in town yesterday. Heard you're planning to marry that woman I sent for, the one who wasn't suitable for me. Her name's Nora. And yeah, we're getting married. Don't see how that's your concern." "Don't see how—" Frank's face reddened. "I paid for her passage out here. I spent months writing those letters, building up to bringing her here. And you just swoop in and take her?" Wyatt took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. "You threw her away, Frank. You left her standing at your gate with nothing but a cruel letter and no way home. You don't get to complain now that someone else saw value in what you discarded. She misrepresented herself. She was older than she claimed, not as pretty as her photograph suggested. She was exactly who she said she was. You're just a coward who got cold feet and didn't have the decency to face her like a man." Frank's hand moved toward his hip where Wyatt could see the outline of a pistol. "You calling me a coward?" "I'm stating a fact. You want to make something of it, that's your choice. But know this, Frank, you come onto my property making threats, you're gonna leave in worse shape than you arrived." For a long moment they stood there, tension crackling between them like lightning. Then the front door of the cabin opened and Nora stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing one of her simple dresses, her hair pinned up, and her face was calm but her eyes were fierce. "Mr. Dillard," she said, her voice carrying across the yard, "I believe you said everything you needed to say to me in that letter. There's nothing more to discuss." Frank turned to look at her, and something ugly twisted his features. "You think you're clever, don't you? Coming out here, playing the victim, latching onto the first man who'd show you sympathy? Well, I see through you. You're nothing but a—" "Finish that sentence," Wyatt cut in, his voice deadly quiet, "and I'll finish you. I don't care what you think you know. You don't talk to her that way. Not on my land, not anywhere." Frank's mouth snapped shut, but his eyes were still full of venom. "You're making a mistake, Collins. That woman's nothing but trouble. She'll bleed you dry, take everything you got, and leave you wondering what hit you. Only mistake I see is the one you made. You had a chance at something real, and you threw it away because you're too damn stupid to recognize quality when it's standing in front of you. Now get off my property. And Frank? Don't come back. You're not welcome here." Frank mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. "You'll regret this, both of you. This whole valley is going to know what kind of woman she really is, what kind of fool you are for taking her in." "Let them know," Wyatt said. "Let them talk all they want. Won't change a damn thing." Frank spurred his horse and rode off, dust kicking up behind him. Wyatt stood there until he was out of sight, his heart pounding, adrenaline making his hands shake slightly. Then he turned to find Nora still on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself. He walked over to her, taking the steps two at a time. "You all right?" "I'm fine. I didn't expect him to come here. Didn't expect him to be so angry." Men like Frank, they don't like being reminded of their own failings. Seeing you here, seeing you choosing someone else, it holds up a mirror he doesn't want to look into. Nora's laugh was bitter. "Choosing someone else. Is that what I'm doing? Because right now it feels more like I'm just running from one situation to another, making decisions based on fear rather than anything real." The words stung, even though Wyatt knew there was truth in them. "Is that what you think? That this is just you running?" "I don't know what to think anymore." She moved past him, walking out into the yard, her face turned toward those dark clouds building in the west. "Frank was right about one thing. I did latch on to you. The first person who showed me kindness, and I grabbed hold. What if I'm making another mistake? What if in a year, or 5 years, or 10, I wake up and realize I never wanted this either? That I was just using you as a life raft?" Wyatt followed her, keeping a respectful distance. "And what if you're not? What if this is exactly where you're supposed to be, and Frank showing up is just him trying to poison something good because he can't stand seeing you happy?" "I'm not happy, Wyatt. I'm grateful. I'm safe. I'm a lot of things. But happy? I don't even know what that feels like anymore." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy. Nora tilted her face up to the sky, letting the water hit her skin, and Wyatt saw tears mixing with the rain. "Come inside," he said gently. "You're getting soaked." "Maybe I want to get soaked. Maybe I want to stand here and let the rain wash away every stupid decision I've ever made, every hope I've ever had, every dream that turned to dust." The rain was coming harder now, and Wyatt moved closer, rain soaking through his shirt. "Nora, please, come inside and we'll talk. We'll figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out." She spun to face him, rain streaming down her face. "Don't you see? I'm broken, Wyatt. Frank didn't break me. I was already broken. I was broken when I got on that train. I was broken when I decided marrying a stranger was better than facing my life alone. I'm still broken. And you proposing to me, you offering me this life, it's just putting a bandage on something that needs more than you can give." "Then let me try anyway," Wyatt said, his voice rough. "Let me stand here in the rain with you and at least try to help you put the pieces back together. You don't have to be whole to be worth loving, Nora. You don't have to be perfect to deserve a chance at something good." "Loving?" She laughed, and it was a broken sound. "You don't love me, Wyatt. You love the idea of not being alone. You love having someone to fill the silence your wife left behind. But me? The real me? The scared, confused, angry woman who doesn't even know who she is anymore? You don't know her well enough to love her." "You're right," Wyatt said, and watched her face crumple. "I don't know everything about you. We've only had 10 days, but I know enough to know I want more days, more conversations, more sunsets on the porch, more of you challenging me and making me think and reminding me what it feels like to care about someone beyond myself. Maybe that's not love yet. Maybe it's just the beginning of something that could become love. But it's real, Nora. It's the most real thing I've felt in 8 years." The rain was a torrent now, turning the yard to mud, and they were both soaked to the bone. Nora stood there shaking, from cold or emotion, Wyatt couldn't tell, and he saw the exact moment something in her broke wide open. "I'm scared," she whispered, so quietly he almost couldn't hear it over the rain. "I'm so scared of trusting this, of trusting you, of trusting myself. What if I'm wrong again? What if... Then we'll deal with it, together. But Nora, you can't live your whole life afraid of making mistakes. You can't refuse every chance at happiness just because it might not work out. That's not living. That's just existing. And you deserve more than that." She was crying openly now, her whole body shaking. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to trust again, how to hope again, how to believe that someone could want me for who I am and not just for what I can provide or how I look or..." Wyatt closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest while the rain poured down around them. "You don't have to know how," he murmured into her wet hair. "You just have to be willing to try. That's all I'm asking. Just try. And if it doesn't work, if you wake up one day and realize this isn't what you want, then I'll let you go. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll know." They stood there in the rain, holding each other, and Wyatt felt something shift between them. Something deeper than attraction or convenience or loneliness. It was raw and painful and real, the kind of connection that came from two people being completely honest about their brokenness and choosing to stand together anyway. Finally, when the rain began to ease, Nora pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair plastered to her face, and she'd never looked more beautiful to him. "All right," she said, her voice hoarse. "All right, I'll try. I'll stop running from this. I'll stop questioning every moment and I'll just be here, with you, and we'll see what happens. That's all I'm asking." She nodded, then shivered hard. "We should probably get inside before we catch our deaths." They walked back to the cabin together, muddy and dripping. Inside, Wyatt stoked the fire while Nora disappeared into her room to change. When she emerged in dry clothes, her hair hanging loose to dry, he had coffee brewing and blankets laid out by the hearth. They sat together in front of the fire, warming their hands on the coffee cups, not talking, but not needing to. The silence was comfortable now, full of understanding rather than tension. "Frank's going to make trouble," Nora said eventually. "You know that, right? He's going to spread whatever poison he can about both of us. Let him. People who matter won't believe it, and people who believe it don't matter." Easy to say, harder to live with. "We'll manage. We've managed everything else so far." Nora looked at him over the rim of her cup. "Why are you so calm about all this? About Frank showing up? About the gossip? About all of it? Don't you ever just want to rage at how unfair it all is?" "Used to. After Sarah died, I was angry at the whole world for a long time. Angry at God, angry at myself, angry at her for leaving me. But anger's exhausting, Nora. It burns you up from the inside. Eventually, I learned that the only way forward was to accept what I couldn't change and focus on what I could. I can't change Frank being a bastard, can't change people gossiping, but I can choose how I respond. I can choose to build something good here with you, despite all the obstacles. That's what I'm choosing to focus on. That's very wise. Nah, just old and tired. Wisdom's what you call it when you've made enough mistakes to finally learn something. She smiled at that, and the smile reached her eyes for the first time since Frank had ridden onto the property. They stayed by the fire until the light began to fade. Then Nora made dinner while Wyatt checked on the horses. The rain had stopped, leaving everything washed clean and smelling of wet earth. That night they sat on the porch again, watching the stars emerge from behind the departing clouds. The air was cool and fresh, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to the rising moon. 4 more days, Nora said. 4 more days until the wedding. You having second thoughts again? Always, but I'm trying to remember what you said about taking it one step at a time. Right now, the next step is tomorrow. I can handle tomorrow. And the day after that? I'll worry about that when it comes. Wyatt reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. She didn't pull away, and they sat like that, holding hands in the darkness, until the chill drove them inside. The remaining 4 days passed in a blur of preparation and growing anticipation. Nora sewed herself a simple dress for the wedding. Nothing fancy, just a soft gray cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Wyatt cleaned up the cabin, made repairs he'd been putting off, and tried not to think about how much his life was about to change. On the 13th day, they rode into town together to finalize things with Reverend Matthews. The stairs were worse this time, the whispers following them down the street like a chorus of judgment. Wyatt kept his hand on Nora's back, a quiet statement of solidarity and protection. At the general store, Samuel Yates was less friendly than before. Heard Frank Dillard's version of things, he said, his voice cool. Heard some interesting stories about what's been going on out at your place, Wyatt. I'm sure you did, Wyatt replied evenly. And I'm sure they're all lies. But believe what you want, Samuel. Won't change what's true. Just seems mighty convenient is all. Woman shows up for one man, ends up with another within a week. Makes a person wonder. Nora's back stiffened, but before she could speak, Wyatt stepped forward. You got something to say, Samuel. Say it plain. Don't hide behind innuendo and gossip. Samuel had the grace to look uncomfortable. Just saying what folks are thinking. Folks should mind their own business. Now we came here for supplies, not a sermon. You selling or not? They got what they needed and left, but the encounter left a bitter taste. In the wagon, Nora was quiet, her hands twisted in her lap. Maybe we should wait, she said finally. Give people time to forget about Frank's version. Let things settle before we... No. Wyatt's voice was firm. We're not letting Frank Dillard dictate our lives. We're not giving gossips the satisfaction of thinking they drove us apart. Tomorrow, we're getting married, and then we're going to live our lives and let people think whatever the hell they want. You're going to lose friends over this. Lose business, maybe. All because of me. Friends who turn on me over lies aren't friends worth having. And business will survive. I'm good at what I do, and people need horses broken and fences mended whether they like my wife or not. My wife. The words hung in the air between them, and Wyatt saw Nora's expression shift, fear and hope and something else he couldn't quite name. Your wife, she repeated softly. That's what I'll be tomorrow. Your wife. Having second thoughts? More like 20th thoughts. But I'm still here, aren't I? Still moving forward? That's all we can do. Just keep moving forward. That night, Wyatt couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the cabin. Somewhere across the wall, Nora was probably doing the same thing. Tomorrow, she'd be his wife. Tomorrow, everything would change. He thought about Sarah, about the life they'd planned and never got to live. He thought about the 8 years he'd spent alone, convincing himself he was fine, that solitude was safer than risking his heart again. And he thought about Nora, brave, broken, beautiful Nora, who'd stumbled into his life and turned everything upside down. Was he doing the right thing? Was he really ready for this? Or was he just two lonely people making a decision based on circumstance rather than genuine feeling? But then he remembered the way Nora looked at sunset, the way she laughed when Buck stole carrots from her pocket, the way she'd stood in the rain and let herself be vulnerable with him. He remembered the conversations that stretched late into the night, the comfortable silences, the growing sense that maybe, just maybe, this could work. It wasn't the same as what he'd had with Sarah. It wasn't built on years of courtship and shared history, but it was real in its own way, raw and honest and full of possibility. Morning came gray and soft, with mist hanging low over the prairie. Wyatt dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral and hadn't touched since. It felt strange, constrictive, like wearing someone else's skin. But when he emerged from his room and saw Nora standing by the window in her new dress, her hair pinned up with small flowers she'd picked from the garden, everything else fell away. She turned when she heard him, and her eyes widened. "You clean up nice, cowboy. You look beautiful." She blushed, her hands smoothing nervously over her dress. "It's nothing special. I didn't have time to make anything fancy." "Don't need fancy. Just need you." They stood there looking at each other, and Wyatt was struck by the enormity of what they were about to do. This woman, who he'd known for 2 weeks, this stranger who'd become so familiar, so necessary to his daily life. In an hour, she'd be his wife. "You ready for this?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "Good enough." They rode to town in the wagon, both of them quiet with their own thoughts. The church came into view, white and stark against the gray sky, and Wyatt felt his heart start to pound. This was it. The moment of no return. Reverend Matthews was waiting for them, along with his wife Eleanor, who'd agreed to serve as witness. The church was empty otherwise. They'd decided against inviting anyone, knowing that half the town thought they were fools, and the other half thought they were something worse. "You're both certain about this?" Reverend Matthews asked one final time. "Once we begin, once the vows are spoken, there's no going back." Wyatt looked at Nora, and she looked back at him. He saw all her doubts reflected in her eyes, all her fears, but he also saw determination, the same strength that had made her stand up after Frank's rejection, the same courage that had brought her halfway across the country in the first place. "I'm certain," Wyatt said. "I'm certain," Nora echoed, and her voice only shook a little. The ceremony was brief and simple. No music, no flowers beyond the small bunch Nora had woven into her hair. Just words. Ancient words about commitment and honor and cherishing each other through whatever came. Wyatt spoke his vows clearly, meaning every word, even though some of them felt like promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Love, honor, cherish, till death do us part. When it was Nora's turn, her voice was soft but steady. She looked directly at him as she spoke, and Wyatt saw tears shining in her eyes. But she didn't cry. She stood tall and spoke her vows like they were a declaration of war against everyone who doubted her, against every circumstance that had tried to break her. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Matthews said. "You may kiss your bride." Wyatt hesitated. They hadn't talked about this moment, hadn't discussed how much physical affection would be expected or wanted. But Nora stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face gently, and he bent down to brush his lips against hers. It was chaste, brief, nothing like the passionate kisses of romance novels. But it was real. It was a promise of something they were building together, one small moment at a time. When they pulled apart, Nora was smiling through her tears. "Well, Mr. Collins, it seems we've done it." "Seems we have, Mrs. Collins." Mrs. Collins. The name settled over her like a new coat, and Wyatt saw her testing it out in her mind, trying to make it fit. They signed the papers, thanked the Reverend and his wife, and walked out of the church into the gray morning as husband and wife. The town was just waking up, people emerging from their homes and businesses, and Wyatt felt their stares like physical weight. Let them stare. Let them judge. None of it mattered now. In the wagon heading home, Nora was quiet, twisting the simple gold band Wyatt had given her around her finger. He'd bought it weeks ago, before he even knew she existed, in some vague notion that he might someday be ready to move on. Now it sat on her hand, catching the weak morning light. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt asked. "I'm thinking that I'm married. Actually married. To a man I've known for 2 weeks. It's insane. Completely, utterly insane." "You want to go back? Reverend might still be there. We could—" "No?" She cut him off quickly. "No, I don't want to go back. I'm processing, trying to figure out what happens now. Now we live, we work the ranch, we figure out how to be married, one day at a time, like we said." "One day at a time," she repeated. "And tonight?" The question hung heavy between them. Tonight, their wedding night, The expectation that came with marriage, the intimacy that would be assumed by everyone, expected by tradition. Tonight we have dinner, Wyatt said carefully. We sit on the porch if the weather holds. We talk, same as we've been doing, and then we go to our separate rooms, same as we've been doing. Nothing has to change, Nora. Not until you're ready. Not until we both are. Her relief was palpable. You mean that? I do. This marriage, it's real in the eyes of the law, real in the eyes of the church. But between us, it's whatever we make it. We move at whatever pace feels right. No pressure. No expectations beyond what we agree on together. What did I do to deserve you? She whispered. You stood up when the world tried to knock you down. That's more than most people ever do. They rode the rest of the way home in companionable silence, and when the cabin came into view, Wyatt felt something settle in his chest. Home. Not just his home anymore. Their home. He helped Nora down from the wagon, and they stood there for a moment, looking at the cabin, at the land, at the life they were about to try to build together. Welcome home, Mrs. Collins, Wyatt said. Nora looked up at him, and her smile was small but genuine. Thank you, Mr. Collins, for everything, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for offering me a choice when I thought I had none, for being patient when I'm difficult, for being you. Ain't nothing special about me. That's where you're wrong. You're the most special man I've ever met, and you don't even know it. That's part of what makes you special. Before Wyatt could respond, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, then turned and walked into the cabin, into their home, leaving him standing there with his heart doing strange things in his chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could build something real from this strange beginning. Maybe Hope wasn't as foolish as he'd thought. The first week of married life was an exercise in navigation and adjustment. They moved around each other carefully, both hyper-aware of the new dynamic, the new expectations, spoken and unspoken. Wyatt went about his usual work, but found himself coming back to the cabin more often, drawn by the smell of Nora's cooking or the sound of her humming as she worked in the garden. Nora threw herself into making the cabin a home. She cleaned corners Wyatt had neglected for years, hung curtains she'd sewn from fabric she'd brought in her trunk, planted herbs by the kitchen door. It was like watching someone claim their territory, stake their ground, and Wyatt found he didn't mind. If anything, he liked seeing his space transformed by her presence. But there were awkward moments, too. Times when they'd reach for the same thing and their hands would touch, and they'd both pull back like they'd been burned. Times when Wyatt would forget and walk in while Nora was washing up, and they'd both freeze, hyper-aware of boundaries and propriety. Times when the silence felt charged with everything they weren't saying, everything they weren't doing. On the 8th night, they sat on the porch, as usual, watching the stars emerge. The air was warm and still, carrying the scent of sage and honeysuckle. Nora had been quiet all day, and Wyatt could sense something brewing. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Always. Do you regret it? Marrying me? Wyatt turned to look at her. Why would you think that? Because we've been married over a week, and we're living like polite strangers. Separate rooms, careful conversations, never touching unless absolutely necessary. That's not a marriage, Wyatt. I don't know what that is. It's us figuring things out at our own pace, like we agreed. But when does figuring things out become just avoiding things? When does taking it slow become standing still? Wyatt was quiet, considering. She had a point. They'd been so careful, so cautious, that they hadn't really moved forward at all. They were stuck in this limbo, married but not, together but separate. What do you want, Nora? What would make this feel more real to you? She was quiet for a long time, her fingers twisting in her lap. I don't know. I feel like I'm waiting for something to happen. Waiting for you to decide you've made a mistake. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I can't live like that. I can't spend every day braced for disaster. I'm not going to change my mind. How do you know? How can you be so sure? Because every day I learn something new about you, and every day I like what I learn. You're smart and strong and funny and kind. You make my coffee the way I like it without me having to ask. You sing to the horses when you think I can't hear. You leave wildflowers on the table just because they make you happy. These aren't big things, Nora, but they're the things that matter. They're the things that make a life. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now. I'm still so scared. Of this, of us. Of everything. I know. I'm scared too. You are? Of course I am. What if I'm not enough? What if you wake up one day and realize you settled? What if I can't make you happy? What if I fail you the way I failed Sarah by not being able to save her? The words tumbled out before he could stop them, revealing fears he hadn't even known he was carrying. Nora stared at him. You didn't fail Sarah. She got sick. That's not your fault. My head knows that. But my heart still thinks if I'd been smarter, faster, better, I could have done something, could have saved her. And now here you are, trusting me with your life, your future, and what if I fail you too? Oh, Wyatt. Nora moved closer, taking his hand. You're not going to fail me. You've already given me more than I ever expected. Safety, respect, a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. How could that be failure? Because you deserve more than safety and respect. You deserve love, Nora, real love. The kind that sets your soul on fire, the kind poets write about. And I don't know if I can give you that. I don't know if I have that in me anymore. Maybe I don't need that kind of love. Maybe I just need the kind where someone sees me and values me and chooses me day after day. Maybe I need the kind that's built on respect and partnership and growing together. Maybe that's enough. Is it? Is it really enough for you? She was quiet, and when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. I don't know, but I'd like to find out. I'd like to stop being so afraid and just see what happens when we actually let ourselves be married, when we stop holding back and start moving forward. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to move into your room. I want to sleep beside you, wake up next to you. I want to stop living like we're two people sharing a house and start living like we're actually building a life together. I'm not saying it has to be perfect. I'm not saying I'm ready for everything that implies, but I'm ready to stop hiding in that spare room, pretending this is something it's not. Wyatt's heart was pounding. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Seems to be my approach to everything these days. Terrified, but moving forward regardless. He squeezed her hand. All right then. Tonight? Tonight. They sat there a while longer, holding hands under the stars, and Wyatt felt something shift between them. Something significant. They were taking a leap, both of them, into unknown territory, but they were doing it together, and that had to count for something. When they finally went inside, Wyatt helped Nora move her things from the spare room to his. It didn't take long, she didn't have much, and what she had fit easily into the chest of drawers and the small wardrobe. But every item placed felt monumental, like they were building something real from these small practical acts. That night, they lay side by side in the bed Wyatt had slept in alone for 6 years. They didn't touch beyond their hands clasped between them, but the intimacy of just breathing in sync, of sharing this space, was overwhelming. Wyatt? Nora's voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for being patient, for not pushing, for letting me figure things out at my own pace. Always, Nora. We're in this together, however long it takes. She rolled toward him then, and in the moonlight filtering through the window, he could see her face. She looked vulnerable and brave all at once, and before he could think better of it, he reached out and traced his fingers along her cheek. You're beautiful, he whispered. I should have said that before. Should have told you every day. You're so damn beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes. Wyatt, let me finish. You're beautiful not just in how you look, but in who you are, in your strength, your courage, your refusal to let the world break you. Frank Dillard was a fool, Nora. The biggest fool who ever lived, and I'm grateful for his foolishness, because it brought you to me. She was crying again, but she was also smiling. How do you always know exactly what to say? I don't, I'm just saying what's true. She moved closer then, tucking herself against his chest, and Wyatt wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. They lay like that, hearts beating against each other, and Wyatt felt something in his chest crack open, something he'd kept locked and guarded for 8 long years. He was falling in love with his wife. Slowly, carefully, but falling nonetheless. And for the first time since Sarah died, that didn't terrify him. It felt right. It felt like coming home. 3 weeks into their marriage, disaster struck in the form of fire. Wyatt woke to the acrid smell of smoke curling through the bedroom window. For a confused moment, he thought he was dreaming, that his mind was playing tricks in the space between sleep and waking. Then Nora stirred beside him, her nose wrinkling, and she sat bolt upright. Wyatt, do you smell fire? He was already out of bed, pulling on his pants, moving toward the window. The eastern sky was lit with an orange glow that had nothing to do with dawn. Christ, it's coming from the valley. They dressed in seconds, fumbling with buttons and laces in the dark. Outside, the world had taken on a surreal quality, the air thick with smoke. The distant crackle of flames carried on the hot wind that had been blowing for 3 days straight. Wyatt ran to the barn, Nora close behind him, and climbed up to the loft window that faced east. What he saw made his blood run cold. A wall of fire was sweeping across the valley, driven by that relentless wind, consuming everything in its path. The dry grass, parched from weeks without rain, was feeding the flames like kindling, and the fire was moving fast, faster than any wildfire Wyatt had seen, racing toward his property like a living thing with hunger in its belly. "How far?" Nora asked, climbing up beside him. "Mile, maybe less. And with this wind—" He didn't need to finish. They both knew what it meant. "What do we do?" Wyatt's mind raced, calculating distances, wind speed, the precious minutes they had before the fire reached them. "We need to cut a fire break. Now. If we can clear enough land between here and the fire, stop it before it reaches the buildings. Then let's do it. Nora, you should go. Take Ginger and ride to town. Get to safety. Like hell I will." Her voice was steel. "This is my home too now, Wyatt. I'm not running." There was no time to argue. Wyatt grabbed shovels, axes, anything they could use, and they ran to the eastern fence line. The smoke was thicker here, stinging their eyes, making it hard to breathe. Wyatt could see the fire clearly now, a roiling monster of orange and red, consuming the prairie with terrifying speed. "We start here," he said, marking a line with his boot. "Clear everything back 50 feet, grass, brush, anything that can burn, fast as we can." They worked like demons possessed, hacking at the dry grass, digging up brush by the roots, creating a barren strip of earth between the fire and everything they'd built. Wyatt's shoulders screamed with effort, sweat pouring down his face, mixing with ash and soot. Beside him, Nora matched him stroke for stroke, her face streaked with dirt, her hands surely blistering, but she never slowed, never complained. "It's not enough," Wyatt gasped after 20 minutes of frantic work. The fire was closer now, close enough that he could feel its heat, hear its roar. "The wind's too strong. It's going to jump the break." "Then we make it wider." "No time." He grabbed her arm. "The barn. We have to save the horses." They ran back to the barn, threw open the stalls. Buck and Daisy bolted immediately, sensing danger, galloping toward the western pasture. But Ginger, sweet, steady Ginger, was too frightened to move, her eyes rolling white with terror. "Come on, girl," Nora coaxed, taking hold of her halter. "Come on, we have to go." A gust of wind sent sparks swirling through the air, and one landed on the barn roof. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then smoke began to curl from the dry shingles. "Nora, get out!" Wyatt shouted. "The roof's caught!" "Not without her." Nora pulled hard on the halter, but Ginger was frozen with fear, her hooves planted firm. Wyatt ran to the water trough, soaked a blanket, threw it over his shoulders, and charged back into the barn. The smoke was thicker now, the first flames licking along the roofline. He grabbed Ginger's other side, and together he and Nora dragged the terrified horse toward the door. They were halfway there when a burning beam crashed down behind them, sending up a shower of sparks. Ginger screamed and reared, nearly pulling free, but Nora held on with strength born of pure desperation. "Almost there," Wyatt coughed out. "Just a few more feet." They burst out of the barn into air that was barely clearer, Ginger finally finding her legs and bolting after the other horses. Wyatt grabbed Nora's hand and pulled her away from the barn just as another section of roof collapsed inward. "The cabin!" Nora gasped. "Wyatt, the cabin?" He turned to look and felt his heart sink. Embers were raining down everywhere now, carried on the wind. One had landed on the cabin's porch, another on the woodpile stacked against the side. Small fires were springing up like evil flowers. "Water," he said. "Water." "The well! We need buckets! Anything!" They formed a desperate relay, Wyatt hauling water from the well, Nora running it to the fires, dousing what they could. His arms felt like lead. His lungs burned with every breath, but he kept moving, kept pumping, kept fighting. Nora was everywhere at once, her dress singed and smoking, her hair come loose and wild, but her face set with fierce determination. When a spark caught the corner of the porch, she beat it out with her bare hands. When flames started climbing the cabin wall, she threw herself at them with bucket after bucket of water. "The roof!" Wyatt shouted. A large ember had lodged in the eaves, and smoke was starting to pour from the shingles. "I need to get up there." "You can't climb up there. You'll fall." "No choice." He grabbed the ladder from where it leaned against the barn that was now fully engulfed, a roaring inferno that lit the night like a terrible dawn. He threw the ladder against the cabin wall and started climbing, bucket in hand. "Wyatt, please!" Nora's voice was raw with fear and smoke. "Please be careful." The heat was incredible, the smoke choking. Wyatt couldn't see more than a few feet in front of him, couldn't breathe without his lungs screaming in protest. But he climbed, found the ember, doused it with water. Then another. Then another. The shingles were hot enough to burn through his gloves, and he felt his palms blistering, but he kept going. Below him, Nora had climbed the ladder too, passing up buckets in a chain, refusing to let him face this alone. Her face was streaked with ash and tears, but her hands were steady, her movements sure. "Together," she said when he tried to order her down. "We do this together." So they fought the fire together, side by side on that burning roof, while the world around them tried to consume itself. Minutes stretched into hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes of pure hell. Wyatt's entire body was shaking with exhaustion, his vision blurring, but Nora was there, her hand on his back, her voice in his ear telling him they could do this, they could save it, they just had to hold on a little longer. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the wind shifted. The wall of fire that had been racing toward them veered south, pushed by the changing wind, missing the cabin by mere yards. The flames that had been threatening the house began to die, starved of fuel by the fire break they'd cut and the water they'd poured. Wyatt and Nora collapsed on the roof, coughing and gasping, too exhausted to climb down. They lay there watching the fire continue its destructive path south, away from them, away from everything they'd fought so hard to save. "Is it over?" Nora's voice was barely a rasp. "I think so. I think we're safe." She laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Safe? We're covered in burns and ash. The barn's gone. We could have died. But we didn't. We're alive. The cabin's standing. The horses are safe. That's what matters." Nora rolled toward him, and in the firelight, he saw her face properly for the first time. She was covered in soot and dirt, her eyebrows singed, her hands raw and blistered. She'd never looked more beautiful. "You climbed up here," he said, reaching out to touch her face. "You could have died, and you climbed up here anyway." "So could you. Guess that makes us even." "Guess it does." They helped each other down the ladder on shaking legs and stood in the yard surveying the damage. The barn was a total loss, just a skeleton of blackened beams and smoldering ash. The eastern fence line was scorched, the grass burned black for 100 yards. But the cabin stood, damaged, covered in soot, with a few burned patches on the roof that would need fixing, but standing. "We did it," Nora whispered. "We actually did it." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, holding her tight despite the pain in his burned hands. "We did. Together." She buried her face in his chest, and he felt her shoulders shaking. He wasn't sure if she was laughing or crying or both, and he realized he was doing the same. The fear, the adrenaline, the sheer relief of survival, it all came pouring out in great gasping sobs. They stood there in the smoke and ash, holding each other, two people who'd fought fire and won, who'd faced disaster together and come out the other side. And something shifted between them in that moment, something fundamental and unbreakable. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about convenience or circumstance, or finding comfort in another person's company. This was partnership. This was what it meant to build a life with someone, to stand beside them when everything was burning, to climb onto roofs you might fall from, to refuse to run when running would be easier. When they finally pulled apart, the sky was beginning to lighten with the real dawn. They walked slowly to the well, wincing with every step, and took turns drinking deeply, washing the worst of the ash from their faces. "We should check on the horses," Nora said, her voice hoarse. "Make sure they're all right." They found all three in the western pasture, nervous but unharmed. Buck came over immediately, nuzzling Wyatt's shoulder like he was checking to make sure his human was still whole. Ginger, the horse Nora had refused to leave behind, walked straight to her and pressed her forehead against Nora's chest. "You're welcome," Nora murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "Though next time maybe run a little faster, yeah?" They spent the next hour checking the property, making sure no hidden embers were still smoldering. The damage was extensive but manageable. The barn would need to be completely rebuilt, but the tools and tack had been in the shed on the other side of the house and had survived. The fence could be repaired. The scorched earth would green up again when the rains came. They'd lost things, but they hadn't lost everything. They'd survived. By the time they made it back to the cabin, they were both swaying on their feet, exhaustion pulling at them like gravity. Nora paused at the door, looking at the soot-blackened walls, the burned patches on the porch. "It's going to take weeks to repair all this," she said. "Months, probably. But we'll do it. Same way we did everything else. One step at a time." Inside, the cabin was a mess. Smoke had gotten in through the windows they'd left open, coating everything in a fine layer of ash. But it was still standing, still theirs, still home. Wyatt stoked the fire, the irony of which wasn't lost on him, and heated water for washing. They took turns at the basin, carefully cleaning soot and ash from burned skin, hissing at the sting. Nora's hands were in bad shape, blistered and raw from beating out flames. Wyatt's weren't much better. "We should wrap these," he said, looking at her hands. "Keep them clean while they heal." "Yours too." They sat at the table, wrapping each other's hands in strips of clean cloth, their movements gentle despite their exhaustion. There was an intimacy to it, to this careful tending of each other's wounds that went beyond anything physical. This was trust. This was care. This was love, though neither of them said the word. "Wyatt?" Nora's voice was soft. "What you said before, about me climbing up on the roof, about how I could have died. Yeah? You could have died too. You did die, nearly, going into that barn for Ginger, going up on that roof. You risked everything. Had to. Couldn't let the fire take it all, couldn't let it take you." She looked up at him, and her eyes were shining with tears. "That's the first time you've said it like that. Like I matter more than the property. Like saving me was the point, not just the cabin." Wyatt's chest tightened. "You do matter more. You matter most. I didn't realize it until tonight, until I saw you on that roof and thought about what it would mean if you fell, if the fire took you, if I lost you. Nora, I can rebuild a barn, I can fix a cabin, but I couldn't survive losing you. Not now, not after everything." The tears spilled over, tracking clean lines through the soot still on her face. "I love you," she whispered. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that day in the rain when you held me and told me I wasn't broken. But tonight, watching you fight for this place, for us, for our life together, I knew. I knew I love you, Wyatt Collins, completely, terrifyingly, with everything I am." Wyatt's heart felt too big for his chest. He reached out with his bandaged hands and cupped her face gently. "I love you too. I've been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon, afraid I was betraying Sarah's memory or taking advantage of your vulnerability. But I love you, Nora. I love your strength and your courage and the way you refuse to back down from anything. I love how you make me laugh and how you see the world. I love that you climbed onto a burning roof because you wouldn't let me face it alone. I love you." She laughed through her tears. "We're a mess, aren't we? Covered in burns and ash, declaring love at dawn after nearly dying. Yeah, we're a complete mess. But we're alive. We're together. And that's all that matters." He kissed her then, properly kissed her for the first time since their wedding day. It was soft and gentle, mindful of burned lips and exhausted bodies, but it was real. It was everything. It was the ceiling of something that had been building between them since the moment he'd pulled her onto his horse and brought her home. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was fully up, streaming through the smoke-stained windows. They should sleep, should rest, and let their bodies heal. But instead they sat there holding each other, neither willing to let go, as if afraid that separating even for a moment might break the spell. "What do we do now?" Nora asked. "Now we rebuild. The barn, the fences, everything the fire damaged. But first we rest. We heal, we take care of each other. And after that? After that we live. We work this land together. We build the life we've been dancing around for weeks. We stop being afraid and just be, Nora. We just be us. Whatever that means." She nodded against his chest. "I like the sound of that." They eventually made their way to bed, too tired to do anything but collapse together. Wyatt held Nora close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, steady and strong, and alive. They'd survived the fire. They'd survived Frank's poison and the town's gossip and their own fears and doubts. They could survive anything as long as they faced it together. As sleep finally pulled him under, Wyatt's last thought was of gratitude. Gratitude that Frank Dillard had been fool enough to throw away the best thing that ever happened to him. Gratitude that Nora had been brave enough to accept help from a stranger. Gratitude that they'd found each other in the midst of their respective storms and built something worth fighting for. The fire had tried to destroy them. Instead, it had forged them into something stronger. The days following the fire were a blur of pain and recovery and slow, careful rebuilding. Word of the fire spread through Red Mesa, and to Wyatt's surprise, help came. Not from everyone. Frank Dillard and his allies stayed conspicuously absent, but from enough people to make a difference. Samuel Yates showed up the second morning with supplies, his expression sheepish. "Heard about the fire. Heard you two fought it off mostly alone. That took guts." "We did what we had to," Wyatt said, his bandaged hands making it hard to accept the supplies Samuel was unloading. "Yeah, well, I may have been hasty in my judgment. About your wife, about the situation. Frank came through town yesterday crowing about how the fire was God's judgment on sinners, and I realized what kind of man I'd been listening to. So here." He thrust a bag of flour at Wyatt. "Consider it an apology." Nora emerged from the cabin, her own hands still wrapped, and Samuel tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for how I spoke before. You and Wyatt seem to have something real, and I was wrong to question it." "Thank you, Mr. Yates," Nora said, her voice still rough from smoke. "That means more than you know." Others came too. The widow Henderson brought food, homemade salve for burns, and her 2 grown sons to help clear debris. Reverend Matthews arrived with several men from the church to help rebuild the barn. Even Martha Jenkins showed up, took one look at Nora's hands, and declared she'd stay a week to help with cooking and cleaning. "You gave up that job at my boarding house," Martha said gruffly, "but that doesn't mean I can't see when someone needs help. Now sit down and let me look at those burns properly." The community rallied in a way Wyatt hadn't expected, and he realized that the fire had done something unexpected. It had proven to the town that he and Nora were real, that their marriage wasn't some scheme or scandal, but 2 people genuinely building a life together. Actions spoke louder than words, and fighting that fire together had spoken volumes. As they worked to rebuild, Wyatt and Nora fell into a new rhythm. Their hands were too damaged for heavy work at first, so they supervised, planned, and did what they could. They sat together in the evenings, helping each other change bandages, talking about the future they wanted to build. "I want children," Nora said one night, and Wyatt's breath caught. "Someday. Not right now, but someday. I want this place to be full of life and laughter and small voices calling for their parents. Is that something you want too?" Wyatt thought about Sarah, about the children they'd planned but never had. For years, the thought of children had been painful, a reminder of everything he'd lost. But looking at Nora, imagining her round with his child, imagining little ones running through the rebuilt barn, learning to ride the horses, it didn't hurt. It felt like hope. "Yeah," he said, "I want that. I want everything with you, Nora. The whole life, the whole messy, beautiful, complicated package." She smiled, that radiant smile that still had the power to stop his heart. "Good. Then we'll build it. A life worth living, worth fighting for, together." The barn took shape slowly but surely. It would be different from the old one, larger, with better ventilation, built to withstand whatever nature threw at it. As Wyatt watched the frame go up, with help from neighbors who'd become friends, he realized something profound. The fire hadn't destroyed his life. It had cleared away the last remnants of his old life, the life he'd been clinging to out of fear and habit. It had made space for something new to grow, something better. He'd been living in the past for 8 years, honoring Sarah's memory by refusing to fully embrace the present. But Nora had changed that. The fire had changed that. He was ready now. Ready to let go of guilt and fear. Ready to love completely, without reservation. Ready to build a future instead of dwelling in the past. 3 weeks after the fire, Wyatt woke to find Nora already up, sitting by the window with her hands, finally healed enough to work without bandages, occupied with sewing. She was making something small, delicate, and when he asked what it was, she blushed. "Just thinking ahead," she said, "to the future we talked about." He crossed the room and looked at what she was sewing. Baby clothes. Small, carefully stitched garments for a child that didn't exist yet, might not exist for years. But she was preparing for it anyway, believing in a future that was still just a dream. Wyatt felt something crack open in his chest, the very last piece of the wall he'd built around his heart crumbling to dust. He took the tiny garment from her hands and held it carefully, marveling at the hope it represented. "I love you," he said, and the words came easier now, natural as breathing. "I love you so damn much, Nora Collins." She stood and wrapped her arms around him, and they stood there in the morning light, holding each other, holding on to dreams, holding on to the future they were building together, one small, brave step at a time. That afternoon, they rode into town together, not for supplies or business, but just because they wanted to. They walked down the main street hand in hand, and if people stared, neither of them cared. They were done hiding, done apologizing for their happiness, done letting other people's opinions dictate their lives. At the general store, they ran into Frank Dillard. He was leaner than Wyatt remembered, his face harder. When he saw them together, Nora's hand in Wyatt's, matching gold bands glinting in the sun, something ugly twisted his features. "Well," Frank said, "if it ain't the happy couple. Heard you had some trouble with a fire." "We managed," Wyatt said evenly. "Managed, right. Heard you nearly burned to death trying to save a worthless barn. All for what? For her?" He jerked his chin at Nora. "Was it worth it, Collins? Was she worth nearly dying for?" Wyatt felt Nora tense beside him, felt her start to pull away, to make herself smaller. But he held onto her hand and pulled her closer instead. "Every second," he said, looking Frank dead in the eye. "Every burn, every moment of fear, every risk, worth it. Because she's worth everything, Frank, and the fact that you couldn't see that just proves you never deserved her in the first place." Frank's face flushed dark red. "You think you're better than me? You think—" "I don't think about you at all," Wyatt interrupted. "You're yesterday's news, Frank, a mistake Nora dodged, a blessing in disguise, if you want to get poetic about it. If you hadn't been enough of a coward to reject her, I never would have met her. So in a way, I should thank you. Your loss was the best thing that ever happened to me." The people had stopped to watch the confrontation, a circle of curious faces forming around them. Frank looked at them, then back at Wyatt and Nora, and Wyatt could see him realize he'd lost. Not just Nora, but the town's respect, any moral high ground he thought he'd had. "You deserve each other," Frank spat. "Two desperate fools clinging to each other because no one else would have them." Nora stepped forward then, and her voice was clear and strong. "You're right about one thing, Frank. We do deserve each other, because we see each other, we value each other, we fight for each other. That's more than you've ever done for anyone in your selfish life. So yes, we're desperate fools. We're desperately, foolishly in love, and we built something real from the ashes you left behind. I'd say we came out ahead." Frank had no response to that. He turned and stalked away, his shoulders rigid with fury and humiliation. The crowd dispersed slowly, some people offering Wyatt and Nora approving nods, others still skeptical but at least willing to let them be. "That felt good," Nora said when they were alone. "Standing up to him, not letting him make me feel small. You were magnificent. We were magnificent, together, like always." They finished their business in town and rode home in the afternoon sun. The ranch was coming back to life slowly, the new barn half built, the scorched grass beginning to show hints of green, the fence line repaired. It wasn't the same as before the fire. It was different, marked by loss and trial. But it was theirs. Built by their hands, saved by their courage, blessed by their love. As they approached the cabin, Wyatt saw something that made him rein in ginger. On the porch steps sat a small bundle, wrapped in cloth. He dismounted and picked it up carefully, unfolding the fabric to reveal fresh bread, a jar of honey, and a note. "What is it?" Nora asked. Wyatt read the note aloud. "Welcome to the valley. Sorry it took fire to make us see what was there all along. You've got friends here when you need them, Mrs. Henderson and the ladies of Red Mesa." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "They accept us. They finally accept us. Looks like it." She laughed and cried at the same time, and Wyatt pulled her into his arms. They'd been through so much, rejection, fire, judgment, fear, but they'd come through it together, and they'd built something that couldn't be burned or broken by anyone's opinion. They'd built love. Real, honest, hard-won love. That night, as they lay in bed with the windows open to the cool evening breeze, Nora turned to face him. "Wyatt, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Frank had accepted me? If he'd welcomed me instead of rejecting me? Sometimes, Wyatt admitted. And then I remember that would have meant never knowing you, never having this, and I can't imagine that life anymore. Can't imagine this cabin without you in it, this bed without you beside me, this future without you in it. Me neither. Isn't that strange? A month ago I didn't know you existed. Now I can't imagine existing without you. Not strange, just right. Sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what actually matters. Nora moved closer, her hand tracing patterns on his chest. I found what matters. I found you. I found us. I found home. Me too, Wyatt whispered. Me too. They made love that night for the first time, slow and gentle and full of the love they declared but not yet fully expressed. It was healing and hopeful, a promise of all the nights to come, all the years they'd build together. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Wyatt thought about the journey that had brought them here, his journey from grief to hope, Nora's journey from desperation to love, the fire that had nearly destroyed them, but instead had proven what they were made of. He thought about Frank Dillard, about that moment when Nora had stepped off the wagon full of hope, and Frank had crushed it without a second thought. He thought about his own moment of decision, when he could have ridden past, could have minded his own business, could have stayed safe in his solitude. Thank God he hadn't. Thank God he'd stopped. Thank God he'd offered help to a stranger who'd become his wife, his partner, his love. Wyatt? Nora's sleepy voice pulled him from his thoughts. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For seeing me. For saving me. For loving me. For being exactly who you are. He kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair. Thank you for being brave enough to stay, for fighting beside me, for choosing this life, choosing me, even when it would have been easier to run. I'll always choose you, she murmured.